Hello, I'm Michael Kurland, CEO and co-founder of Branded Group, an award-winning facility maintenance and construction management company that services multi-site commercial properties such as retail, restaurants, healthcare facilities, and educational institutions. Welcome to the Be Better podcast. Each week, I interview thought leaders from a variety of industries who will share their stories and the lessons they learn as they strive to be better for their clients, partners, employees, and their community. Are you ready to be better? Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Be Better podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kurland. Joining me today are the co-founders of LessLonely.com, Ryan Jenkins and Steve Van Cohen. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. So, Ryan, Steve, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you guys do?
Yeah, well, thanks again for having us. And we are the founders of LessLonely.com. We just wrote a book called Connectable, How Leaders Can Move Teams from Isolated to All In. And Steve and I are business partners, and we've a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, we were studying the emerging Generation Z, and how they were going to make a splash in the workforce. We discovered that they were the loneliest generation, and that troubled us. And so we decided, okay, why is this happening first and foremost? And then second, what can we do to help this generation? So that kicked off our research into the topic of loneliness. And then the pandemic happened. We brought all this loneliness research to our clients thinking, I don't think humans are ready to talk about loneliness, but let's see. And turns out everyone was ready, and it blew us away. And so COVID finally has pulled back the curtain on the topic of loneliness, and humanity is ready to talk about it. And so we've now put together a book. We went and researched over 2,000 global workers, worked with 50 leaders and hundreds of organizations to distill all this information. And our goal is to destigmatize loneliness and create more belonging in the workplace. And through all this work, we found that Gen Z is still the loneliest generation, but not by much. The top of the organization, middle of the organization, entry-level folks all experience it. And so we're looking to broach the topic and start creating healthier teams, healthier communities, and higher performing organizations through it all.
Awesome. Steve, I see you over there shaking your head. So you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is loneliness is one of those topics that no one really wants to talk about, even though everyone should be very aware of how they're feeling if they are feeling lonely. And leaders in organizations, they aren't necessarily like going above and beyond to try to talk to people about their feelings and emotions and loneliness and anything that might be kind of a sensitive topic. But our book and the work that we're doing is essentially focused on having more conversations and understanding this really, really common emotional state, because it has a direct impact on our productivity, on morale, on retention, on our well-being, both physical and emotional. And that's a really big deal that's flying really under the radar. So Ryan and I have spent a few years now really diving into this, and the further we get into our research and understanding, the more blown away our brains get, because it's just such an interesting and fascinating topic.
Yeah, I was excited to get you guys on because for me, I've experienced it myself, and I'm the CEO of a 135 person organization. It wasn't always that big, but even when we were a 20 person organization, I was super lonely. I was isolated because I kind of isolated myself in one aspect because I moved from New York to California to open my company 8 years ago. So I had no real support system. But when I got out here and, I spent all the time working on the company, I didn't spend a lot of time being social. I was in my mid-30s at the time. And so I had no friends. And then I took some time and I started making friends after the first, call it a year and a half. And I had some friends, but those friends were not CEOs. So they didn't understand my daily. I'd be like, hey, I had to fire someone today. And they're like, I made 100 calls and I did some emails. And I'm like, great, I don't know how to relate to you and you don't know how to relate to me. So, that was something that I definitely experienced. And then to your guys' point, pandemic, that was one of my biggest concerns, because I think we have a more millennials. I don't know, when does Gen Z start? Maybe we can clarify that.
Yeah, at the year 2022, it's about 24, 25 years old and younger is when Gen Z starts.
Yeah, so I got quite a few Gen Zers and I got quite a few millennials, right? Because that's the next step up after Gen Z. So that worked for the company. And when the pandemic hit, they were living by themselves in an apartment, working from home. And what were they doing? There's no one to police. Not that they need to be policed, but there's no parents there. So you're struggling with loneliness and isolation, and they're drinking or they're abusing substances or, binge watching Netflix, losing productivity, losing, the performance. And it was a real thing that I was worried about, and we saw firsthand during the pandemic. So this is really interesting. Sorry, didn't mean to go down that whole long wormhole there, but.
No, it's, I think an important distinction to make for the audience is that loneliness isn't the absence of people necessarily, it's the absence of connection. And so to your point there, Michael, when people are at home, yes, they're not surrounded by people, but oftentimes they can find themselves distanced or disconnected from the work or the culture or the organization. And that's what we're trying to do with this conversation and with the book, is really trying to make people aware of the science of loneliness, how it impacts our body, but then also really how do we start creating stronger connections with ourselves, with our team members, with our leaders, with the work itself. How do we start connecting with more purpose at work? All these things that we have to think about, and that's why we argue that the workplace is the most fertile ground to tackle loneliness, is because there's so many loneliness lifelines.
So let's backtrack a little bit here, if you guys don't mind. Talk to me about, why is Gen Z the most lonely generation? What have you found the reason for that?
There are lots of reasons. The three reasons that I'll talk about, it's not a surprise, right? And it's not necessarily because they're antisocial or because they are uncomfortable talking to other human beings, or they grew up just with technology and they don't know, how to talk to somebody face to face. That's not it. Essentially, the environment in which they grew up in, which now all of us are living in, right? And it's why they're the loneliest, but there's still so many other lonely people, has to do with these three big reasons. The first is what's called dependency shift. So dependency shift is 20 years ago, if I needed anything, I depended on other people to help me. Like, with as simple as, where do I take my girlfriend out to eat? I'd have to call a friend, be like, hey, give me an awesome restaurant, or what movie should I go see, or what album should I go, pick up? Or if something breaks, I would go talk to a neighbor, like, dude, I need help. My sink is overflowing. I don't know what to do. Now, the amount of dependence we have on each other has gone away. If I need to learn something, I go to YouTube, right? If I need a recommendation on where to eat, I go to Yelp. If I need help with a problem, I go to Google. I no longer need other people to intervene in the things I'm doing every day. And Gen Z, they're younger than Google. So their entire upbringing had access to all of these different types of resources that are non-human. So they just became less exposed, right? And they became less dependent. So that's one big reason. The second big reason is due to busyness. And I was busy as a millennial growing up, right? Like soccer practice and all the extracurricular clubs and all this, that, and the other. But in Gen Z's world, they're even busier because they had a whole bunch of other things to do, and they're preoccupied with lots of extra homework and pre-work and using technology to communicate through the night versus, back in the day when I would call my girlfriend and talk for an hour on the phone, like a landline phone. That was the amount. And
then your mom would pick up and be like, Steve, it's bedtime.
What are you doing? Hurry up, go to bed. They didn't have those restrictions, and we're busier now than ever before in history. So that is another reason. And then the third is what Ryan and I call the catch of convenience. We live in a world that's predicated by frictionless experiences. So I don't need to talk to a barista anymore. If I go to Starbucks, I put in my order online and I just walk in and grab my coffee. I no longer need to go into a restaurant to get food. I no longer need to go to Walmart to buy a toothbrush, right? I live in a world where things can be done for me without any human interaction. And that just means I'm not rubbing as many shoulders with other people. And for Gen Z, right, like they've lived in a world of convenience, which has just given them less exposure. So those are three really big reasons for why they are the loneliest generation on the planet. But those reasons are essentially impacting all of us if we think about why we all might be lonely, today in 2022.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I never thought about the dependency shift. That is like such a huge thing, right? I don't need to talk to anyone to get anything done anymore. I can just sit in my little like Oz chair, right, and make it happen. And so can everybody else. Which,
Michael, I'll give you a good story that relates to this real quick. I've got 3 young children, and we have a babysitter that's a Gen Zer, and we're throwing a party at one point, and we had the babysitter help us, get ready and prepare the food. And there, as you can imagine, there was a lot going on in the kitchen, and my wife handed her a can and a can opener and said, "Hey, can you open these up and put these on this plate?" And more commotion was happening around the kitchen, and a couple of minutes went by, and noticed nothing was happening. That can had not been opened. And turns out, we looked a little bit closer, observed a little closer. She was watching a video, and we thought, "Oh no, is she distracted? She's done with this preparation work." And she wasn't distracted. She was actually learning. She was on YouTube trying to figure out how to use a manual can opener. And it's a good example of this dependency shift, right? Instead of just asking real quick or connecting with one of us, she just went to what she knows best, and she learned how to use the can opener and then got it done. And that was that. But it took a little bit longer. But, that's a small example, but that's what's happening with all of us, right? We're often choosing convenience over connection, and it's slowly tearing us apart. And so in the future, when more and more of this technology is coming at us, we've got to be really vigilant now more than ever to fight for more of this connection.
So totally off topic, but kind of not. What about the metaverse? What's your thoughts on that? Seriously, what do you think is going to happen when that? Because I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Ready Player One, but it's basically
Yes.
In the future where there's a metaverse and all people just connect in the metaverse, and they don't. It's kind of scary for me to think that that's where we're going. But what do you guys think? I'm not trying to talk about NFTs and all that other stuff. I just think do you think that is going to be the biggest thing that we're going to fight against for connection in the coming years?
It's a big problem. As I think about the future, I'm really scared. Man. So I'll tell you a story. I have a client, and I do a lot of executive coaching, and we were having a conversation, and he goes, "Steve, off topic, I had this really weird experience the other day, and I don't know what to do about it." And I said, "Well, I'm interested. Tell me all about it, And he said his daughter had some friends over, and there was these 4 girls, and they're all teenagers. So I think they're like 13, 14 years old. And he said, I came downstairs, and the 4 of them were all on their devices texting with each other together. Like they're together in person, and they're using their devices to text each other versus have a conversation face to face. And he's like, he goes, "What do I do?" And I go, "Dude, I don't know, man. That's the future." And
right.
That is scary. And if you tack on avatars without feet floating around in the metaverse, living this amazing fake life that is so
right.
easy and convenient, I don't think that bodes well for the future humans that are going to be coming into play here. So I'm scared, man. I know Ryan's got his own thoughts on it, but for me, I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we have to tread really lightly, and we've got indicators now of how technology can pull us away from each other. But technology is useful. Steve and I always use the example, like if we gave you a button, a big red button that said delete the internet on it, would you push that button? Even though the internet gives a lot of headaches at times, most of the people, probably 95% of the people we ask, would never push that button because there's just enough benefits that outweigh the risks. So we continue to adopt technology, and that's likely going to happen with metaverse. There's going to be useful things for it. But I think, we've all experienced how these devices, is putting subtle divides between us. If I put my kids in front of a screen for any length of time, they basically lose their capacity for emotional intelligence. They have a really hard time regulating their emotions after they get removed from a screen. And so, yes, there's ways for us to connect in these environments. We've all experienced it when we had to be distant 6 feet away and not be in the same office together. Like, we can use these tools to connect, but it's just not the same. And I don't think all of us are wildly underestimating the how much we need human connection. And so again, that's why we love having conversations like this, because we want to emphasize, we want to put multiple exclamation marks around conversations like this, because we are just wildly underestimating how much we need human connection, how fundamental it is for us to operate and to be healthy. And again, that's why we love having conversations like this. And the metaverse puts a big pressure on cultivating that healthy human connection that so much of us, all of us, need.
Yeah, I don't have any children yet, but that's on the horizon in the coming years, and I'm scared shitless. Because I don't know how to. You think about it, right? Because, and I don't want to get too far off topic with this, but I thought it was important to touch on. But you think about, there's going to be all these outside influences, and I don't think a lot of parents are probably thinking like the three of us are thinking, right? That, kid, you need to not be so attached to your device, and you need to regulate your emotions when you get off your device time. There's probably some parents that are like, here you go, kid, like, play on the iPad and just be quiet while I do whatever I'm doing, right? And so when they go to school, are they going to, you're a loser because you're not in the metaverse and you did, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Kids got enough to worry about at this point growing up, right?
Metaverse bullying. It's on the horizon. Get your kids ready. Well, Ryan and I had this conversation. I think it's so interesting. I'm 37. I'm the wise one. He's 36. He's still a young pup. Lots to learn in the world here. But we had this conversation. We said, have you ever, at any point in time through any of your schooling, learned how important it is that we actually have meaningful connections with the people around us? Like, that's never been taught, ever. I've never learned the biology of why we are wired to connect, and why as a social species it's so important that the connections we have with each other are robust and meaningful, right? And rooted in a sense of trust and belonging. That's never been a conversation ever that I've had. And if we don't start to have that conversation, and if people don't, especially parents, if parents don't understand really the significance of their kids not feeling fully seen and connected with their peers, it's going to be a disastrous situation. So if you look at the statistics, we started to unpack loneliness during the pandemic, but some of our research that we uncovered is really scary. Like in 2018, 61% of Americans said that they feel regularly lonely. So that's pre-pandemic. And in 2017, it was 7% lower. During the pandemic, it's shot up over 72%. So you are seeing a very, very steady line that is just continuously going up. And unless there is a seismic change in how we interact, or how we just, differentiate values and put a certain importance on certain things, that's just going to continue to grow in the wrong direction. And it's a bad situation.
Yeah. I will just touch on, I did in school at Lynchburg University, now Lynchburg College in Virginia, we took a class called Communications, and Dr. Jimmy Rue, great communications teacher, he told the class, you're going to go, the whole class, all you had to do was go to an old person's home, and you had to connect with one of the people in the old person's home. And unfortunately for me, I got the guy that told me he wanted to die because his wife had been dead for 30 years and all he was just waiting to die. And I was like, man, can I get somebody else, please? But so that connection didn't go so well. But then I read a book, and I hope you guys have read this book, Tribe by Sebastian Junger. That is exactly what you're talking about, Steve. Just like, why we connect, why we need to connect, and like why as a species it's so important for us to connect. So audience, I know you've heard me talk about it numerous times, but highly recommend it again. So let's backtrack even more. Like, how did you guys meet, and why did you decide, like, hey, Ryan, hey, Steve, like, let's start studying loneliness? Like, why, where did this come from? And like, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so we're both really consultants and trainers, and for the last decade, I had been a keynote speaker and working with audiences all around the world, all different kinds of industries. But my lane was around generations, and that's where the study of Generation Z, and then discovering that they were really lonely. And Steve is a training guru, and so he saw this big opportunity with a lot of the clients that he was working with, that training, learning and development needs to be updated, because these emerging generations, they need something new. And so we connected online. Steve brought this idea that, hey, how can we refresh training to deliver something more sophisticated and better to our clients? And so I brought the expertise on what the emerging generation wanted. He brought the expertise on how to effectively deliver learning and development for corporations. So that kicked off our partnership. And then how we landed on loneliness was, again, looking at Generation Z. And we didn't have any plans to explore it, but all of our clients wanted to talk about it. Whenever they came to us and they wanted X, Y, or Z, and then we just told them a little bit about the project around loneliness that we're working on, all their attention went right to that project. They thought, that's what I want. So we knew we had something here. And so we put together a book proposal, shopped that. That was a feeding frenzy. So we just kept getting affirmation after affirmation after affirmation that people were finally ready to talk about this. And here we are. The book just came out, and we're excited to really start having this conversation at
Ryan,
scale.
you are a segue artist. Let's talk about the book. It's a big week, right? Book dropped this week called Connectable: How Leaders Can Move Teams from Isolated to All In. Is that correct? All right, let's talk about it. That's awesome. Yeah. Congrats on the book, guys. And let's talk about the book.
It's the world's greatest book that's ever been written. You talking about Tribe? Tribe's good. It's here. This book, Michael, it is like Tribe on steroids, man. It is Tribe 4.0. It's cool. So the book, it breaks down a few important in a few different arenas. So we wrote it specifically for leaders in organizations, because we feel like, from the research, and we know from what we have uncovered, that work is the best place to lessen loneliness for a whole bunch of reasons. And even though we're not wanting leaders to be therapists or psychologists or start to diagnose any kind of loneliness or mental health problems, leaders have the single greatest opportunity to create more connection within their teams. So we wrote it to that audience. However, we created a tone within the book that essentially will allow anybody who's either feeling lonely or wants to help somebody they know feel less lonely, read it and say, yeah, there's so many strategies and examples and stories in here that I could really start to benefit from. So we begin with unpacking loneliness, why it's happening. We have a section called the Bandit of Belonging. So why do we feel not as close with the other people that we interact with? And then we have a whole bunch of chapters on strategies. So what are the really fundamental things you can start doing in order to create more connection in your life and at work? And we use examples like cocaine and ATMs and woolly mammoths and Red Sox fans and Chicago commuters and astronauts and all these really weird, wacky examples that we came across to help create these ties that people will remember and hopefully find some solace in. So that's a high level overview of the book. Ryan, anything else that you want to add about it?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when you think about loneliness, you think, oh, what a gloomy topic. And this book isn't gloomy, it's illuminating. And we've put 50 original illustrations that are humorous in the book. So we wanted to make this very accessible for everybody. And we wanted to change the tone and change the conversation as it relates to loneliness. And so the book is going to give you everything you need, but we created all these other tools. So in the book, there's a self-assessment. We also created the world's first team assessment where you can figure out how connected your team is, and it's empirically validated. We worked with researchers out of Harvard and University of Canterbury, University of Alabama. So it is chock full with really actionable stuff to really move the needle on this. And our goal is to just create healthier organizations that spill out into healthier communities and ultimately a healthier you and me, humanity.
Well, two things I want to go back and touch on. So why is work the best place to attack this?
So it's so strange the way that people respond to loneliness. So loneliness, we equate it to hunger, right? Hunger is a biological cue that you need to eat. And when you're hungry, what do? You grab an apple, you put some sustenance in your body, and that emotional request is essentially granted. Loneliness is essentially just our biology. It's nature's way of saying, like, you need to forge a connection. It's a reminder that you need to feel more connected with the people around you. But instead of just reaching out to somebody to feel that connection, people resort inward. They like move away from others because loneliness is a shameful feeling. And if someone's feeling lonely, oftentimes they create this downward spiral of like, I'm unloved, I'm unwanted. I've tried to connect with people. They don't want to connect with me. I'm already feeling this way. I don't want to feel worse. So they move in the wrong direction. Which is why loneliness compounds and becomes really difficult to get out of. The reason that work is the single greatest place for people to feel less lonely is because you have to show up. Like, you have to interact with other people. You can't just be in like a loneliness cave in your room under your covers alone. Like, you have loneliness lifelines in the form of your boss, your clients, the team members, right? All these other just touch points of human beings. So when the team and the leader knows what to look for, they could pull you out from this deep, dark place of loneliness, which is oftentimes what people need because it's hard for them to get out by themselves.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I'll add to that. Yeah. Work is where we spend the most of time of our waking hours. So that's a good place to start, right? And then also too, work creates routine. So that's often helpful. And there's also learning. Steve and I've discovered that learning lessens loneliness, kind of similar to, if you're experiencing gratitude, you can't be angry. In the same light, if you're learning and you're enthralled in something, you can't be lonely. So those are some other aspects that really help you to lessen loneliness. And the last thing I would say is purpose, right? If you have purpose in your work and if you feel really connected to your work, because again, it's not the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. So if you can find purpose and that draws you into the work, that lessens loneliness too. So work is just chock full of all these loneliness lifelines.
Totally. And we've done, or I don't think we've done the research, but we've seen the research where if you give, I believe it's millennials, a purpose, they will actually stay and take less money to stay in the workplace. So we've found that, which helps our retention rate, which was something you guys brought up earlier. And I think is a very underrated statistic for all employers. Your retention rate should be the number one focus of what you're trying to accomplish, besides your number two focus, obviously, whatever you're selling or bringing to the table. But this is all great information. So you also dropped a podcast in the past month. Let's talk about that real quick. It's called The Case for Connection. So tell the audience about the podcast and where should they be tuning in for this?
Yeah, if you go to lesslonely.com/podcast, you can find the podcast there, or wherever you listen to podcasts, search The Case for Connection. And we did a full season where we unpack a lot of the really fascinating research that Steve and I unpacked. So it's just Steve and I having really fun impromptu conversations. So we uncover some really interesting research. Then we react to it. What does this mean? How do we interpret this? And then we give a response. What are we going to do, or what should listeners be thinking about as it relates to forging more connections in our life? So it's a lot of fun. Check it out.
Did you guys breach the topic of the cocaine in the book? Because I'm still curious about that.
Yeah, dude. Yes. There is an entire episode dedicated to cocaine. So
Great.
the cocaine research that was done by these two MIT scientists, and they were wanting to research the impacts of withdrawals from some of the drugs. But in the research, they inadvertently found these neurons in our brain that were responding to the isolation of these mice who were being removed from the substance, and they accidentally literally found the part of our brain that registers loneliness. And it's created all kinds of really interesting sub-studies that talk about the biology and how our brains are responding to this sensation and why it's so significant. So if you're interested in mice and cocaine and brains, episode 1 of The Case for Connection is really up your alley.
Oh, that was the lead. That was the lead off, the jump off episode. I love it. This is great. So, gentlemen, it's really been great having you on the show. I've enjoyed our conversation. I want to get you guys to just tell the audience a few things. If you could tell them the name of your website again, just so they have it. If you could tell them the name of your book and where they can get it, and again, the name of the podcast and where they can listen to it, that would be awesome.
You can find us at lesslonely.com. The name of the book is Connectable, How Leaders Can Move Teams from Isolated to All In. You can find that wherever books are sold. The podcast is The Case for Connection. Find that wherever you listen to podcasts. And then fourth, you didn't ask for this, Michael, but I'm going to throw it in there. Steve and I have been very active all over social. We're giving tons of connection tips on any social platform, including TikTok. And you can find us all on the platforms at Ryan and Steven. So thanks for letting us shout those out.
Gentlemen, it's been great. And audience, until next time. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that today's episode inspired you to become a purpose-driven leader in your career or your community. There's no doubt that when we lead with purpose, we can change lives. If you enjoyed today's show, I'd be grateful if you would take a moment to rate us on your preferred listening platform. To learn more about Branded Group's Be Better experience and how we provide industry-leading, on-demand facility maintenance, construction management, and special project implementation, visit us at www.branded-group.com. Be sure to follow us on social media, and you can also reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Until next time, be better.
This podcast was produced by Heartcast Media.